Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire. Okay, this is Youth Worker on Fire podcast, and I have Leslie Campion, I have Greg, her brother Shamrock, Clark Blake, who this is about, actually, and I surprised him with all of his friends, and then Brooks Braswell, who is much later in the game with Fellowship Christian Athletes, and Katie Carter, who was one of the first to start that. Okay, so these guys are going to talk with Clark about FCA, some of the things that happened those first years first. And then, Leslie, tell us about what happened when you were there, okay? Because you've got like 5 minutes.
Katie's up. Because Katie and Greg, they were the ones that were there at the beginning with Coach Blake. You guys were on football team. Coach Blake was your football coach, and FCA was just starting at that point.
Yeah, what I remember about it was Coach introducing us to FCA and telling us about it and having us go to a camp that was in North Carolina.
Okay. Black Mountain.
Black Mountain, North Carolina. And we went there, and the theme was, when you come down off the mountaintop, keep things going. And what a change it made. And at that time, to see Coach Blake be the leader that he was as a Christian and being a man, the strength that came from him is what really got our group going.
Leslie, how many years later, because I know we're getting ready to lose you.
Okay. Well, it was about 4 years later. These guys were seniors when I was in the 8th grade. And so I looked up to them, and I had heard the stories about Black Mountain, and I had heard about Coach Blake. So coming to Eustis High School in the 9th grade, I mean, the first thing we all wanted to do was learn more about FCA and be a part of FCA. And one thing that you guys just brought to mind was that mountaintop experience when you went to Black Mountain and you were there among all these other student athletes that were worshiping, and we were competing, and it was just such an amazing environment. But the lesson was, you got to come down from the mountaintop. You got to go back down to the valley below. And that's really what FCA was about, was how do you maintain that intensity, your relationship with Christ, your commitment to be the kind of person that you needed to be in order to walk in Christ. And that's what Coach Blake gave us, that structure, by having FCA, that place to go to talk to other students and to get that example from him.
It's just the fact that when I came in today, of one of Doug's trickeries that he always seems to pull off, and to be in the presence of these adults who at one time were students, and they were foundational with FCA, foundational without question. And God has used them in a powerful, powerful way in their lives. And just to see each one of them and in their lives, to see how they have progressed professionally and what they have done in their communities and how they're touching the lives of other people. What a huge blessing it was this morning. I had this great smile because I kept, there's Greg, and there's Katie, and then there's Brooks, and there's Leslie, and I'm saying, what's going on here? I should have known it was Doug. I should have known that. But just to make this, it's not about me, but it's about what God's purpose for us in this life is. And we don't recognize those purposes generally at the time they happen. Mm-hmm. And for whatever reason, and it was God's reason, that Mike Kleinmeyer was the first player to go, came to my house, said, he didn't ask me, he said, you are going next year. And I said, okay, Mike. And so then these people had an opportunity to have that mountaintop experience at Black Mountain. But I was truly blessed in the sense that when I left after that week at Black Mountain, I knew what God wanted me to do. I didn't know how to do it, okay? but God directs that in our lives. He enables us. He trains us. He calls us. This gentleman sitting next to me, Brooks, and how God has called him to ministry, how God has used him to bring people to Christ. And each of these people that are here, this is just the greatest thing and blessing that I could have, just to sit among them this morning.
And Coach, you know what? You're right. And this is just a small fraction of the people that were reached, even when you were here, and it went on after you left. And every one of these guys are community people. They're people that are impacting their community in a large way. I mean, this is a powerful deal here. Leslie, you're getting ready to leave, so tell me, these guys started with 20 and 30, and we're going to go backwards. I'm ADD, so I can do that. I can go forwards, I can go backwards in time. It'll be all over the place, all right? And so tell us about, these guys started with 20 and 30. They were like the ignition. We're near NASA, so that was like the fuel that just blew and started this climb, rocketing. So tell us what happened when you were there.
Well, just hearing you say that, I kind of get goosebumps thinking about how it was just starting when they were in school. And then by the time I got to Eustis High School, and then when I was graduating in 1982, it was by far the largest organization on our campus. Everyone wanted to be a part of FCA. They wanted to know what it was about. And because it was based in athletics, a lot of kids were looking for a way, how can I get involved in athletics? Because I want to be a part of FCA. You know, and you had kids that were trainers. They were helping on the various athletic teams, whether it was cheerleading or volleyball, swimming. And it was just something that everyone wanted to be a part of because we got so much out of it. We learned so much and we took it back into our lives. And the amazing thing is that looking back now, you realize, I think like Coach Blake said, you don't realize at the time how something's going to impact you in the rest of your life when it's happening. And then you look back and you go, wow, you know, that was really an amazing time. And there were so many kids that were impacted and went on to live their lives in a way that he was our example. He was the guy that we wanted to be in our families. You know, we wanted, when our kids were going through school, we wanted someone like a Coach Blake that would be there, that would be that mentor, that shining star that would motivate them. The really neat thing about Coach Blake is that, and you can probably tell, he's just a bundle of energy. He's a great motivator.
Yeah.
He gets you really excited about life. And the focus of FCA was about our relationship with Christ and how to take that and apply it to every aspect of your life. And as a young person, you know, that's a powerful message that it changes you and it goes with you your entire life. And you want to pass that on to your kids.
Well, what do you think life would have been like without FCA? How do you think it impacted you compared to what it would have been like without it?
It's really hard to imagine because it was so entwined in our experience at Eustis High School. It was such a critical part of the whole entire experience because not only was he a great leader at FCA, but in the classroom, he was the teacher, you know, that got you excited about learning. And so it carried through to how he lived his life, and we could see that. So I don't know that I can really imagine what it would have been like.
Tell an example.
Yes, please.
Of FCA and Coach Blake. At FCA, when we started out, we had leaders, huddle leaders, and then we broke into small groups, and we would talk, and the small groups would be like 5 or 6 kids, and we met weekly, and so it became a routine that we were meeting weekly and discussing Christ in our lives. And from Coach Blake being the example setter that he was, from being such a tough coach and strength guy and a man of all men, you had that respect and you didn't mind standing up for Christ at school and stuff. And an example was I even took that to college and was in a fraternity and stuff and ended up having a Bible study at the college in the fraternity from FCA starting out, you know, and it was just a natural thing to say, hey guys, you know, we're going to have a Bible study, anybody wants to come. And I would have never done that if I hadn't have done it through high school and had that experience. And there was nobody that had any problem, you know, saying that they were Christian and we're going to FCA and stuff with Coach Blake as the leader because of the respect. And what a hard nose he was as a coach and everything. He'd kill us out there on the field and then still tell us he loved us. So, it all went together.
Not many people could do that.
I think it's interesting. FCA at Eustis High School was not a fad. It wasn't like a seasonal thing. I mean, it was a commitment. It was life. There's two things that Coach Blake brought to the table that I think any educator should take to heart. He brought consistency, and he showed that he cared. And consistency could be every Tuesday morning at 6:45, having some orange juice and apple juice and some milk and some donuts. But to a, sophomore or freshman, a junior or senior in high school, you're showing up and somebody had to do that. Mm-hmm. It didn't just appear. Somebody had to commit some time. And I think that there was a Bible verse that just came to my mind, that let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works. But what? We're not here today to glorify Coach Blake, even as you have said.
Right.
But it says that they may see your good works, yet glorify your Father that's in heaven. And I mean, to me, Coach Blake was really the epitome of that, in that we wanted to be more like him because he wanted to be more like Christ. And so ultimately, we were wanting to be more like Christ. And I think it was a challenge to, even me today in the ministry, to be able to understand you can impact a person's life, not just for a season. You can impact their life for their life. Mm-hmm. And even today, it's been a challenge to me when I had the privilege to come back to Lake County to serve as the pastor of First Baptist Umatilla. I had prayed that God would allow me to have a long tenure somewhere, because you reach multiple generations. Mm-hmm. So now, you look at all of us in this room that graduated at different time frames, 20, 25, 30 years apart. I'm not giving out ages, but they just named out dates. And in that, he impacted not just us as children, he has impacted our children because we now are impacting them. And that's a special thing to be able to, take part in.
Yeah. And I'm going to say goodbye to Leslie. Yes. And
let me just say it was great to be with you guys today and reliving some of these memories. And thank you, Coach Blake.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Thank you for your heart.
You've been
thank
a blessing,
you for what
and
you
you continue to
have
be a
done all
blessing.
these years. We love you.
We love you too.
And she got these guys together, except for Brooks. He told one of your jokes Sunday morning. I said, well, this is what you got to do.
Yeah.
You said it's Coach Blake's joke. You have to be here.
One thing I'd like to say is whenever we see Coach Blake, we use the word coach. Mm-hmm. And I think that as far as being a father, I think calling somebody coach is, in my view, one of the biggest honors, because the impact that the coach will have on everybody's lives. And as we came here today, I mean, Coach Blake talks about how honored he is as far as being with us. The honor is ours as far as being with Coach Blake. And it's a special time to be able to sit here with him. Mm-hmm. And I was sitting in the cars when I arrived here, and I was looking back. It's been 40-something years since this first started. And I would encourage, all the coaches out there, we're examples of how somebody can impact a life. And we're looking back now. I would just encourage the coaches out there, and look at this gentleman right here, Coach Blake, mm-hmm. for the example. And really research him and learn about his life, because he is the example.
And by the way, you can hear his story. We're going to tell a little bit about your story, Coach. Up to You, which is Michael Helms. He's the one who edits the audio on this. These guys edit. It goes to Michael. He edits again. He's with Bright House, which is Spectrum now. Does it as a volunteer to make sure that we're ready for iTunes and all that stuff. And the YouTube stuff goes from these guys. His story's there, Up to You, UP with a number 2 and another U. And it's also under Michael, the sound guy. Coach, we're going to talk a little bit about that. What kind of pain? There was pain to cause you to be the type of person you were. And one thing I remember you saying is, I really wouldn't wish the things I had to go through onto people, because it was a tough road, basically, that brought you to be the person you are. What's your comment and thought about that?
Well, my first thought is that the things that happen to us in our lives, God is constantly working on building our character. Mm-hmm. And my life is compared to the lives of some of the people that I've read about or have known, is really a good life. But the difficult things of family, my mother being shot, and even serving in Vietnam, compared to so many of the other men and women that not only lost their lives but lost so many other things, and how God took those and used those events for His purpose. I am so grateful, and I cannot go through this, Doug, without making reference to you, because throughout all of this, there are people in my life that have influenced me, like yourself, that I remember going to the Methodist church on a Sunday afternoon that we're going to have baccalaureate, and putting black plastic and long ladders up on the windows so Doug would be able to show the videos, and his presence at FCA and his ministry that impacted literally thousands of kids for Christ throughout Lake County and other areas. So, your influence on me has been tremendous in this process. And as I want to focus on that, God takes all of these events, and the older I've become, it has allowed me, especially in my prayer time, to be so grateful and thankful to God for leading me through those events and to help me to deal with life. And so I've received so many blessings from those difficult times now that I can see them in a different light, and I'm grateful for God's presence.
Tony Robbins, and Tony's not necessarily the guy I'd recommend a lot of people to go to, but Tony is one of the most influential guys, and here's what he says. And we're talking presidents, and they call Tony, these guys. And he said, when you learn to embrace the things that hurt you as good for you, and when you become thankful for them, then you're starting to move forward in life. And that you have to embrace those things. And that was powerful for me. And you're saying the same thing. You didn't hear him say that. That's something that you've embraced since you were very young.
Well, again, I was powerfully influenced by coaches. And Brooks, as maybe my first coach, when I went to junior high school in Fort Lauderdale, it was in a barracks, and there was this big, tall, 250-pound, 6'2" guy by the name of Coach McCall, Stan McCall, that had just graduated from Mississippi State. He was a two-way starter on their football team, and man, when I would go to PE, I would have run through a brick wall for that man. So not only him, but other coaches that positively influenced, they were my father figures. I didn't have a father figure because of having 3 different stepfathers and other issues. But those coaches, they didn't realize it. But I was definitely, if they told me to do something, I was definitely going to do it. And so I know that God led me into teaching and coaching because of the impact that those men, as I went through high school, as I went through the Marine Corps, and I went through college, that those people had that positive influence. I was blessed with that, without question.
Yeah. Well, Doug, the really interesting fact about this setting right now, even as he mentioned Stan McCall, Stan attends First Baptist Church of Umatilla, and he is one of those guys. He's an inspirational person. You would want to run through a brick wall for him. I would choose not to because the brick wall would win. But if you've seen Stan, the brick wall might lose against him. Greg's brother taught me Sunday school years ago. Coach Blake impacted my life at Eustis High School with the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. You were my youth pastor and baptized me, years ago. Katie's, son-in-law and daughter attend First Baptist Umatilla, and his son-in-law is now leading FCA in this county. And so when you look at those connections, it's really a beautiful picture of what small town America can be, but how small town America can impact, as I said earlier, multiple generations that then impact their children. And even a guy, I think it's perfect that you brought that story up. I mean, you were down in South Florida, run into a guy that came from Mississippi State. You know, he impacts you. Now you come up to Lake County. Well, guess what? He lives in Umatilla now. And it's really, really an amazing thing to see how our lives are impacted. I shared with our staff yesterday how Jesus had the ability to see the crowd but touch the individual. He was in front of thousands of people, and everybody thought that Jesus was there for them because he had the ability, like in John chapter 9, it says that he perceived that that man that was born blind had more of a need than just his blindness. And he reached out and he touched that man and he gave instruction to that man. And every time I'm on the pulpit and I'm shaking hands after church, I'm reminded, you know what? There's a lot of people here, but today, there's just one. And they think that message is just for them. When we're out and about at the grocery store, you aren't just the pastor. You aren't just, the coach. You aren't just, a business owner. You're a person that has the privilege to impact a person's life. And just by touch, just by acknowledgement, and just showing that you care. That's one thing that I'll reiterate. Coach had the ability to be consistent and show that he cared every time that you saw him. I used to think he was superhuman. He would always tell us he got up at 3 a.m. to work out. I'm like, who is this guy? If he gets up at 3 a.m., that means he must go to bed at 6 p.m. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, it's funny how all that works out. And whether I got up at 3 or 3:30 or whatever, that was a good thing for me at the time, and it allowed God to help me to organize my day in a manner, that I could get through the day, but yet God was so good in relationship to bringing me to this community. I go back and I look at my wife and Cheryl, and when I met her when I was in college, and we got married then, and on August 12th of this year, we'll be married 50 years, and for that woman to have hung with me for 50 years is a miracle in itself. But
great men have great wives and women behind them. I tell you, it's because it's difficult on them. It is. Yeah.
But just the fact of listening to Brooks, listening to Greg and to Katie and to Leslie, to see the impact of how Christ has worked, moved, enabled them to do the things in this life for Christ is truly, truly a blessing to see them. It's not me, believe me.
Well, and that's part of the thing. Katie, just grab a mic whenever you need to talk or want to talk, because I want you guys to jump in. That's what I want people to see. It's not that you're superhuman. It's that you allowed yourself to be used. And when we are simply used in life, people see us as superhuman because they're going, I could never do that. Whether it's what you're doing or he's doing. I mean, I can't imagine what you guys do. I grew up in the business world, but you guys are business. I mean, you guys are business, Y'all have done these things. You've impacted things. You've had those bills you had to pay in the beginning and things that you had to do and hardships that I mean, it wasn't hard for you to build a business, it wasn't. No, I forgot. It wasn't hard for you. But all those things are hard and difficult. One, the stat I heard years ago was this: an average person just a normal person influences about 10,000 people in their lifetime. And I said to one of the principals here, I said, how many students, you're dealing with now? He said, well, 1,300 here in the high school. I said, that's 1,300 lives here that you have to organize and impact and make sure that they get what they're supposed to get. And they have 1,300 families, and you multiply that times those numbers, and then you multiply times the grandparents and that they're affecting. It's infecting an entire community. And so the tens of thousands and possibly millions that you guys, because of being with him, have impacted and what's happening here. It goes on far beyond us. And that's what we're saying to Youth Worker Nation. All these guys around the world that are either volunteering, that are youth pastors or pastors, that are teachers or coaches or administrators, most all of us got in for one reason. We loved adolescents, we loved college students, we wanted to see their world changed forever, right? Whether you're a believer or not, that's usually why you're in education, why you end up going to ministry, that sort of thing. And that's what you did. You're a normal guy that had unusual circumstances that developed the leader within. And John Maxwell says we all have a leadership lid, that it takes that pressure really to find out how high that lid is, how large, how tall it is, whether it's a 10 or whether it's a 2. Pressure brings that out, and pressure brought out in you, that 10 and pushing 11.
I'm not sure about that, but I will tell you that when I graduated from high school and had made a decision to go in the Marine Corps, and the only reason I made that decision to go in the Marine Corps was I knew, number one, that it was a tough branch of the service, and so I was blessed to be self-motivated to work hard and do the best I could with that particular time. But the Marine Corps itself had a tremendous impact on what I would be able to deal with the rest of my life. So I'm always grateful for them. And they have tough lessons. Mm-hmm. And when I go back and I look at that 4 years in my life of how God used that to continue to direct my path, I'm extremely grateful.
Well, and we're talking about this 4 years, Katie. I want you to go with that. But 4 years in the Marine Corps is probably like 24 years somewhere else and in Vietnam. And we know some of your stories, and those need to come out. Katie, what are you going to say?
I just want to say I was not in the military, but I definitely feel that you shared the military with me for my 4 years of having you for a coach, because if we go back and talk what you put us through compared to what the players
like
go
that,
through
what you
today,
put us through, right?
It's totally different. And everybody laughs about it, but the guys that we've had as players, and Greg and I starting out with weightlifting here at Eustis High School and out there in the little concession stand that was the weightlifting room compared to the weightlifting facilities now. But as we all get together and we've had a reunion with players that were players under you, Coach Blake, we can tell the stories of what we went through, and you talk about how it helps you throughout life. And again, I think it's helped our faith of what we went through in playing sports and finding our breaking point or how much we could go through, because it's totally different for students that have not played sports and gone through that with coaches, and I'm going to say hollering, and getting on to them, and the discipline, talk about discipline again, that we went through and that you distilled upon us, pleasantly or unpleasantly, made us the people we are to be able to handle things that we go through with life. And again, the witness that you shared to us, I can't say it enough times, the leadership of us respecting you as a man made it easy for all of us to say we don't have a problem, standing up for Christ. Mm-hmm. And even it was in high school to, you hear all the time, well, if you're a Christian, well, that's not the manly thing. Well, that has gone away here in Lake County because of the way you presented it to us. So that's where being a tough coach and being a leader really had an impact on us.
And I would say, as far as, you can lead the Bible groups and so forth, but it's the example that Coach Blake set for us, looking for guidance and so forth. You saw him when he was out coaching us. He was there coaching us, and he was either running with us, he was out there working out with us. And not only that, is his example as far as when we talk about him getting up early in the morning and going through his training and his routine. That was an example that he set for all of us. And I know for myself, just from high school on, it's always been a routine for me as far as every day is important. And you get up in the morning and you have something to accomplish. And I think that Coach Blake, that was something else he instilled in me, as far as moving forward in my life, it's just I think it's important to, as far as the coaches out there, looking back, and the teachers, because it's the example also that you're setting for everybody. They're looking at you.
Coach?
Well, one of the things that I want to recognize, too, is that God places in our lives a lot of different people, a lot of different friends that we should indeed be so grateful for. And when I go back and I look at how rapidly time has passed, yes, I always come to mind that a dear friend, Dr. Eugene Glenn, and he passed away this past year. But what an example and influence he was. And
I'm laughing because Doc Glenn, I don't know how old he was when he went out skiing with us out in Colorado. You said, "Can Doc Glenn go?" I said, "Well, yeah, Doc Glenn could come with college students." And I went with Doc one time. My thing was you learn by falling, and so I fell a lot. And I remember him saying something to you like, "Doug falls a lot." What a man. Oh, my goodness. I mean,
there's no question. This man came from very, very meager beginnings in his life, but had a great work ethic. And the things that he did in relationship to our friendship and what he did for the community and the fact that he knew Jesus Christ as his Lord and Savior, that bond that we had created was really a huge blessing in my life as well.
Yeah, every time I hear Dr. Glenn, I always think of racquetball.
Yeah.
Racquetball and Coach Blake racquetball. And if you ever remember back as far as hearing when Coach Blake hits that racquetball, it's hit. It was.
I've been hit by that racquetball before. Yes. That's where I met Doc Glenn.
Yeah.
On the racquetball.
Yeah, he had a lot of influence.
Doug, one thing I think it's been echoed here today is the coach's ability to push you. He was never my coach in sports. I did not have the privilege of playing the game of football like these two men. I played a much more masculine game called tennis, and I think Coach's biceps were too big for that. But one of the things that I found myself say to one of our staff is I said, the reason that I'm hard on you is because I know how good you can be. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, it was like an out-of-body experience with Coach Blake, pouring into your life. He had the ability to push you. And it wasn't, at that time it was probably grueling, but because of the respect that you had for somebody, it drove you to want to do it. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in his life is a great example that, as you said, hardship, you survived. He survived. He came out on the other side, and it made him even stronger in his life. And it's challenged me as I'm a leader today to lead in a manner that, number one, I live in a way that people will want to respect me. But as a leader, you lead in a way that people will want to follow.
Yeah, yeah. Coach, tell me how important names are, students' names.
Well, extremely important. When I go back, and when I walked into campus today, it was just kind of surreal. Mm-hmm. And yesterday I sat down and I jotted down some different items that about people that have influenced. And just today of sitting here and seeing how these men and Leslie and so many other students that influenced me in a positive way of coming into a classroom. And realistically, education is tough. It's mm-hmm. difficult. Athletics is tough and it's difficult. Mm-hmm. Being consistent in your faith with Christ is difficult. These men and lady have passed the test, as so many others have passed the test, not because of me. It's because of their desire to improve their personal relationship with Jesus Christ. Their desire, and that's what Christ wants from us, is to have that ability to praise Him, give Him the honor, give Him the glory He deserves. We don't deserve that. What He did for us of dying on that cross, suffering the way He suffered, and that was for the sins of the world. That's for a sinner like myself. And for us to never take for granted the routine things of this life. You know, and that's every breath of air we take, you know, and I'm just grateful. I can't count the number, but I do get minimal flashbacks. The older I become, I have a lot of skips and misses, but just the fact of a name that may come up, a name that I remember what that person did as a student, as an athlete, but as a Christian, and their faith that they possessed. You know, that I was way blessed, so much more than I deserved to be in relationship to that.
Yeah, well, and we're going to talk about names, and you guys, when I say names and coach, you have different thoughts because he remembered your name. He remembered as many people's names as possible. The big deal for me, there's two things. One is that my wife was here for 1 year. She moved down from upper state New York, her senior year. And she said, the one teacher I will always remember is Clark Blake because he knew my name. Knew my name. Then you wouldn't speak every year, but you'd speak at baccalaureate, and you would always incorporate, that's probably why you didn't want to do it every year, you try to incorporate everybody's name into your communication. And one thing that we all want to know is, do you know my name? Now, I don't remember everybody's name. I struggle with that sometimes, but I remember you and friends that I've had that have that kind of, put that kind of importance on somebody's name. And then graduation. You guys remember him calling out names at graduation, whether it was yours or somebody else's?
Yeah, he didn't call them out fast enough.
No, yeah.
Let's get this party started.
He did one time. It was going to rain. He was getting ready, and he saw it. But he would go, you would go, and you would make sure that you would ask the ones you didn't exactly know how to pronounce them. You'd pull those students in somewhere along the way and go, okay, make sure how to pronounce it, right?
Oh, absolutely. I truly felt that everybody that walked across that track to get ready to graduate from high school, that they deserved their full name to be pronounced correctly and clearly to the audience, and the joy that that person in that moment of sunshine had as they graduated was truly good.
Doug, it's really funny that you bring that up. Yesterday in our staff meeting, that was one of the things that I constantly challenge our staff, but I'm yesterday reminded them names matter. And we have this thing every Sunday called a bulletin, and the back of it's blank. And you can go around the room and meet new people. And when you meet somebody and they say, who they are, write their name down. And next Sunday, try to find that person. But don't look at your bulletin. Study throughout the week. And I guarantee you, every time a person walks into an Ace Hardware and Katie's able to call out their name, there is a personal relationship that it makes them want to buy more products from Ace Hardware. And every time somebody walks into the veterinarian clinic and the Shamrock family remembers their name, it is important. And I tell you, when you shake hands at the door of a church on Sunday, when you have a large congregation, if you can call out a person's name, it literally is a game changer, because you are no longer the business owner, you are no longer the guy on the stage, you are a friend. And that makes a huge difference. We all need to have somebody that we can call in our time of need. And when you know your doctor's name, he's not just the doctor, the guy down the road. When you know your mechanic's name, when your car's broke down, when you know your pastor's name, when life is breaking down, it means something. And I guarantee you, Coach Blake had to deal with athletes on the field that were not having a lot of promising things taking place at home, but they knew that their coach knew their name.
Yeah.
And he didn't say it in a derogatory way. He said it out of respect. And I appreciate you bringing that up today, because to me, that shows a personal touch in a person's life, that you're not just a number. All of us went off to college and we became a number pretty quick. And it was a big change when you went from
Social Security number. Huh?
Yeah. It was a big change, but I think that it was certainly an important thing that you brought that up today.
That's such a great, encouraging thing, Brooks, because you, without question, when you connect that face with a name, and I know throughout the other ministers in your church and yourself, that absolutely gets a person's attention when you can say their name right to them and give them a smile and a word of encouragement. These are the things that help us to deal with life. Then God wants us to be that encourager. He constantly talks about encouragement throughout His Word. And for us to be an encourager to other people, we don't know the circumstances. We don't know the type of day that person's going through. So the better that we can smile and say, hey, how's your day going? That's a good thing, And these men, I know these men. And I know that they are great encouragers to other people.
That's encouragement's what it's all about. You've thanked so many people. You've thanked me, and it always meant so much to me when you thanked me. Brooks called out my name a couple times. When you call out people's names, a lot of times in public or somewhere where they're not expecting it, it's possible they're going through some stuff. And those couple of times, they were very tough days for me.
Wow.
Let me tell you. And so it's important when somebody calls out your name. And I'm the worst with names. Oh my gosh, I've been around Coach. He should have influenced me. What happened to you with me, man? But anyway, I struggle with this name. I don't remember everybody's names as well, but I'm always really impressed. And I've had a couple of people. There was one guy that ran camps, and he was a pastor. But also a middle school teacher. I don't know how you do both those things. But anyway, and he was a middle school teacher and coach, and but he pastored, and he ran these Civitan citizenship camps. He hired some of us guys that he knew from other camps, and when we were in college. And years later, after those camps, a decade later, he would see, and there were hundreds and maybe thousands over the years that went through those camps. He would remember their names.
Well, see, this also comes, there's another side to the coin there, because I'll sometimes be out in public or at a particular store, and somebody will come up and they don't say my last name. They say, hey, Coach, how you doing? Right, now, Coach, you don't remember me, do you? And I'm at an age where I say, you're right, but your face is familiar, so just tell me your name, and then we won't dance around the circle.
That's right. That's right.
So, that's all good.
Tell me about the classroom. Tell me what, I know some of the things he did in the classroom. My son, Ryan, my oldest son, he was getting ready to retire. And so I took Ryan, I think, in fact, we homeschooled Ryan 1 year. And it may have been that year, or I took him out of school or something. I said, we're going to go sit in Coach's classroom. I asked him if it was okay. And I think we sat there all day, and went from class to class because I wanted Ryan to have that impact. My other two didn't get that impact, except that Christopher, my second son, because I would drag them around to all the football games and different things that we would do, My daughter, she wouldn't go. I found out, well, girls, she's not going to be dragged anywhere. But those two boys, we did. And so we're on this middle school trip, and I had no idea that Chris had this kind of the personality. And I think you helped coach Chris. Did you help, or you coached against him on another team, or I can't remember which way it was. He said, Dad, I want to be a chicken on our next retreat up in Gatlinburg. I said, what? He said, I want to be a chicken. He said, can we go get a chicken suit? And I said, I'm not going to buy a chicken suit. I said, but I know somebody who's got one. Yeah. And so we called you up, and you said, oh, yeah, they're in the attic. And you got out that chicken suit, and I got a big old 11 by 10 or 10 by 8 or whatever that was with my son in your chicken suit. You're still being influential for people that weren't even in your class. So what about that classroom, guys?
Coach taught me economics, and when he was teaching us, he was a fairly new teacher at that time, so he wasn't using the uniforms and dressing up as much. But we did come back for a reunion years later, and he actually dressed up for us and showed us, because he was the one taking us around the school, showing us what everything was like. And I guess that may have been our 20-year reunion or whatever it was. But we went into his classroom, and he did pull out the costume, and showed us how he dressed up sometimes. And I just want to share this real quick also. We also had an award for the football team, the Clark Blake Award, for showing your attitude and the way you played and things. And during my time, we didn't have that award, but my son also went through Eustis High School and played football, and he actually won that award his senior year. And Coach came because he had retired, but he came back and gave that award to my son. And so I had my picture taken with Coach Blake and my son for that award. And there was also another award, which was the Jerry Lee Patrick Award, that had been going since I had gone through. But since Coach Blake had retired as a coach and stuff, they'd put that Clark Blake Award to the football team now, and I believe they still give it away. So that, again, is just an example of the impact that Coach had on the field, in the classroom, and everything, and we appreciate it.
I think most of us here grew up in church, and one of the challenges that I have given myself is the question, how many sermons do I remember? Out of all the years that I've been in church, and I think we could all ask ourselves a question, how many sermons do I remember? Well, I have made a decision early on in my time in ministry that every sermon matters. I think, as Greg had just said, every day is important. And so if every sermon matters, how can I do all that God has blessed me with to make it intriguing? I don't care that I'm not opposed to saying the word entertaining. I think some of the most entertaining people at the foundation of this great nation were ministers, that they had a very entertaining message. And it wasn't just to tickle the ears of people. It was to engage the listener and leave them with something as a reminder. I distinctly remember days in the lunchroom or in the band room for FCA watching two guys cover themselves in peanut butter with this goofball skit that they were doing. I remember a day where we did a skit where an individual was waking up and they kept turning the alarm clock off. They'd turn the alarm clock off and somebody come up and brush their teeth and they'd spit, into this cup. And then the last person didn't have time to brush their teeth, so they just drank all the water and spit and everything. Why do I remember that? Because it was crazy, it was silly, but every time Coach Blake did that in the class as it pertains to dressing up in a costume, having the game Jeopardy, giving out candy as a reward, it reminded us, you almost lost sight that you were learning. And on Sunday mornings when I preach, I want people to lose sight. This is not some boring, reverent moment where you don't have to, listen or learn. This is a moment you want to listen. Mm-hmm. You want to be engaged. You want to remember because you want to apply it to your life.
Is that why you start out every sermon with your joke?
It really has a lot to do with it.
Make sure you get everybody's attention.
Yeah.
See, I think Brooks is actually referring that he wanted that big Snickers bar at the end for getting the most Jeopardy points.
That's right.
And I go back and I look at that craziness of maybe 12 or 13 different costumes. And sometimes when I go in the back room to change, and I had a mirror back there, and I'd look and I'd say, you are really sick.
Yeah.
And you are going to go out there and do this funky chicken dance, or you're going to, go out there and look like a clown, or you're going to be this or the caveman or whatever it was. And I really did get a joy about doing that. And I don't know why, and it kind of caught on with the kids, and they would start bringing in stuff for me to wear. But my wife made most of the costumes,
Cheryl did, that's right.
And I go back to those even early days that she made some of the clothes I wore to school before you guys. I remember her making these double knit dress pants that had red, white, and blue circles on them. And I'm thinking, now, you could have actually wore that for Jeopardy because, I had some big wide belt and I thought, I really did look good. Or I thought I looked good. I really looked like a clown.
One thing I'd like to say is I know as we're talking how much, fun that Coach made learning process, but I also want to say that there was also a definite respect in the classroom. And that's probably one of the bigger things I took away as far as when you walked into his classroom. It was a classroom. We were going to learn, but he made it fun. I just think that, as we went on, that was one thing we did respect our classroom.
Well, and there was definite order. Mm-hmm. Fun without order can be chaos, and that was not the case in his class. And I think that's where, the discipline that he taught all of us, even if you weren't an athlete that, played under him, that you expected that. You knew that was going to be kind of the rule of the class, but he didn't have to really come in and usurp his authority or, lower the boom, to maybe on Katie he had to, I don't know.
No, I didn't.
I've had a couple times at First Baptist Umatilla when I've dressed up. I've preached 2 times out of a tree stand in full camouflage, pitch black, come in like I'm hunting. We decorated the stage. I dressed up like Superman one time, and I flew throughout the crowd. I was a fisherman one day, and I cast lures into the crowd. I had a sermon series called Messages from Mayberry, where we did law enforcement appreciation, and I showed a clip from Andy Griffith for every sermon. And the last Sunday,
Coach, you see what you call
I dressed up like Barney Fife. We had literally had a Mayberry car out front that we took pictures. But let me say this. If there's anything in my almost 10 years at First Baptist Umatilla, it's probably those 5 to 10 moments that people talk about all the time.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Yeah.
And if we can humiliate ourselves at the expense of our own humiliation, provide learning, then I say I'm all for it.
Yeah. I remember one particular situation that we were playing Jeopardy, and I was dressed up as a chicken, and there was a knock on the door, and when I went to the door and opened it up, it was an assistant football coach from FSU, and he was inquiring about a particular player. Now, he saw this coach dressed up as a chicken, so I can imagine what he said when he went back to see Coach Bowden. Coach Bowden, now, I've seen some crazy things, but there was this coach from Eustis that looked like a chicken. So things happen, and that's all good.
I want people to remember that you are a recon Marine. Now, I didn't understand exactly what that meant. I hadn't really tried to. I loved the Marines. I respected them because, we were taught as a nation to respect the Marines and the things you guys went in first and stuff, but you are a recon Marine. And the influence of a recon Marine who is the toughest of the tough, dressing up in a chicken suit in an Oreo costume.
Yeah. I mean, that's got to be really kind of crazy, isn't it?
I mean, well, your sergeant's going to turn over in his grave, I guess.
Well, you mellow when you get older. I guess that's what happens.
Is that it? Yeah. But I remember Brant, your youngest son, went into the Marines, and man, what a great thing he did the way he did it, because I think he went through boot camp every summer for a while or something.
He went to 2 summers his sophomore and junior year. Had to go to 6 weeks of boot camp at Quantico, Virginia. And he got his eyes open that first 6 weeks, and that dramatically changed how he went the next 6 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, and most just go through once. He went through twice because he was in a system through the educational system. Right. I remember when he received his, what did he receive?
When he was commissioned.
Commissioned, there you go.
We had it at the church. Yeah.
And they said something like, what do you think of your dad now that you've gone through, this Marine training? And he wasn't recon. I mean, you were recon. He knew what recon was. He knew the difference there. And he says, I should have been a lot more afraid.
I would just say, and Greg brought it up earlier, but the impact that coaches have, good or bad, is really huge. And that is one of the things about FCA and the coaches being involved and the impact that it has with the other athletes on campus, and how those are the leaders. Those kids normally are your leaders that are on campuses, and how that affects the overall flow of what's happening at school. And that, again, is why I think it's such a great thing, and what Coach Blake did and the impact that he had was just from the effect overall that it had on the campus.
Yeah. I would sit in the parking lot at Eustis High School almost every morning, and I normally had stopped and got a bag of powdered donuts from the convenience store, and I would take off the dash of my truck my FCA Bible, God's Game Plan for Living. Mm-hmm. And I think all of us have probably had a God's Game Plan before. And, if you were young in your faith and you didn't know where to turn in Scripture, the great thing about the FCA God's Game Plan Bible was you could go to the back and look up words like forgiveness or doubt or, fear, struggles that you were dealing with, and you could find resources in there. You could go directly to passages of Scripture that would encourage you. And, I think that was something that Coach taught us in an indirect way by his own life. He taught, I didn't get up at 3 a.m., but I did get up and realize, each day matters, put a plan in place. And that was important for me to start off the day with the Word of God and powdered donuts.
And powdered donuts, the healthy food, right. And then some wheatgrass, right? Right after, okay. Wheatgrass is.
Yeah, before I let
Clark's
Coach Blake talk, as far as I would say, just this little bit of time that we spent here sitting, it just the emotions, the old emotions that you're feeling. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to get out there. I'm ready to go do the work. I'm ready to go. So this has been quite an experience, just being here this short amount of time and just having this opportunity to talk about Coach Blake and hear him talk also.
I just want to thank you, Doug. I know you're a trickster and have always been a trickster, and always have appreciated the things that you have done. And this is a huge blessing to sit among these three men, and when Leslie was here, and to just fill my mind with all of those awesome, wonderful thoughts in relationship to the lives of these people and these godly men and women that are spreading God's good news in their lives. And it is a huge blessing this morning. I deeply appreciate each one of you and your kindness, and Doug, again, for your kindness, and to truly, truly express my appreciation for this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And Coach, and here's what I told students growing up. I didn't tell it when you were in there, but later I realized this, and that was this. You need scary people in your life. Scary people, and that meaning that you need people that are bigger than yourself, that do things that are beyond what you thought you would do personally. And so I call them scary people. I have several scary people in my life that I go, what did they do? I don't think I could do that. I don't think I would do that, And because those scary people that you place in your life and it's a good scary, is those people that are ahead of you, are doing things more than you, push you to do more than you would do originally yourself. And so what I tell Youth Worker Nation, you guys that are working even as volunteers, and Coach, by the way, you weren't only in FCA, you're a volunteer. You were paid to be a teacher, but let me tell you what, you got a stipend for being coach. Youth Worker Nation, that doesn't pay for your coffee, okay? I mean, what they pay coaches, for their stipends. So that was a volunteer too, also, and you get abused for your volunteerism sometimes, right? And so those are big things. Clark, how can these guys, is there a way that they could get in touch with you in Youth Worker Nation if they just wanted to write you or something? And is there email, something?
My email address is blake62cb@yahoo.com. They're welcome to contact me in that manner. And I think that our lives are based, that Christ wants us to extend ourselves in helping other people. I've been blessed even in these 14 years of retirement to work with a recovery addiction program that three mornings a week that I get to meet with 10 to 12 guys that are going through recovery and for a workout. And again, not one thing that I did. God's understanding, His sovereignty, and His blessing to show me. All I have to do is to show up, and God showed me, not me, but God. And so that's been a huge blessing. So
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'd meant for that to come up today, because you're still volunteering. How long ago did you retire from teaching?
I retired in 2003. My wife, she works for Life Choices, and she teaches Awana, and so we're both active in relationship to small groups at our church, and so
and I had
we're
the privilege
blessed.
of working with Bradley, and Bradley did all the media stuff. He went crazy with me for several years, and Brant was in the program, and Brant, by the way, just one of the funniest guys I've met.
He is a piece of work.
He is a piece of work. He's a piece of work. And how many grandkids do you have now?
We have 9 grandkids.
That's right.
Bradley, their family has, they have 6, 5 boys and a girl.
Yeah.
Britton, West, Trent, Grayson. Davis and Sadie is the last girl, and Brant, they have 3, Caden, Jackson, and Addison.
And that, so they're trying to catch up.
They're not going to catch up.
They're not going to catch up? Okay, all right. Okay, Youth Worker Nation, we're out. Make sure you write him, and also you can go to youthworkeronfire.com, and you can find us on Facebook. You can also find us on Google Play, iTunes. We're getting many of these sessions on YouTube. Eventually, they'll all be on YouTube as well as those other sources, Stitcher. I'd like to thank all of you gentlemen for being here today. And by the way, you can hear one of Coach's talks. 2013 was the last time I recorded him, and it's an incredible talk. I'd forgotten. It showed up on my computer, and we put that on one of the podcasts, so I think you go back about 3 or 4. And gentlemen, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Doug.
Everybody say, see you, Youth Worker Nation.
See you, Youth Worker Nation.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.